The pharmacy clerk was fired for talking too much, and the millionaire heard her say a phrase. It was exactly the same phrase his daughter used with him before she disappeared 17 years ago. The December rain hammered against the windows of Bridgeport Pharmacy. Like an unwelcome reminder of Chicago's harshest season, Hannah Clarke wiped down the counter for the third time that afternoon, her emerald green eyes distant as she hummed a melody she couldn't quite place, one that had haunted her dreams for as long as she could remember. "Hannah, dear, could you help me with something?" Mrs. Rose's trembling voice cut through the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. The 78-year-old woman clutched her worn purse against her chest, her weathered hands shaking as she approached the counter. "Of course, Mrs. Rose. What can I do for you?" Hannah's voice carried the warmth that had made her beloved among the neighborhood's elderly customers over the past 2 years. Mrs. Rose's eyes filled with tears as she placed a crumpled prescription on the counter. "It's for my granddaughter's insulin. The doctor says she needs it, but..." Her voice broke. "I just don't have enough this month. My Social Security got cut, and after paying for groceries and rent..." Hannah's heart clenched as she looked at the prescription. The insulin would cost $340. Money she knew Mrs. Rose didn't have. Without hesitation, she reached for her own wallet, the one that held her meager savings from working at the pharmacy. "Don't worry about it," Hannah said softly, pulling out her debit card. "Let me take care of half of it. We can work something out for the rest." "Oh, honey, I couldn't possibly..." "It's okay, really." Hannah's fingers unconsciously traced the small scar on her forehead, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. Sometimes we all need a little help. What Hannah didn't notice was the man in the expensive charcoal suit standing near the cold medicine aisle, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled despite the weather outside. Richard Whitmore had been visiting small pharmacies in working-class neighborhoods for over 2 decades, driven by a desperate hope that bordered on obsession. Today, like every other day for the past 23 years, he was searching for his daughter. Richard's hands trembled as he watched the young woman at the counter. There was something about her, the way she moved, the gentleness in her voice, the unconscious gesture of touching her forehead, but it was what happened next that made his world tilt on its axis. "Clarke." The pharmacy manager, Howard Avery's voice boomed across the small store like thunder. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Hannah froze, her card still in her hand. "I was just helping Mrs. Rose with..." "You were just what?" Howard's face was red with rage as he stormed over, his 45-year-old frame quivering with indignation. "This isn't a charity, Hannah. We're running a business here. Not a damn soup kitchen." The few customers in the store turned to stare, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and pity. Mrs. Rose shrank back, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Howard, please," Hannah whispered, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "I was using my own money. I don't care whose money it is. You're supposed to be working, not playing Mother Teresa." Howard snatched the prescription from the counter. "And this isn't the first time, is it? You're always giving people discounts, letting them pay later, getting too involved in their personal problems." Richard found himself stepping closer. Drawn by something he couldn't explain, the young woman's profile was clearer now. The delicate jawline, the way her hair caught the light, the familiar tilt of her head when she was upset. "You know what, Clarke?" Howard's voice grew louder, feeding off the attention. "I'm sick of this bleeding heart nonsense. You talk too much. You stick your nose where it doesn't belong, and now you want to turn my pharmacy into some kind of charity case." He pointed toward the back office. "Go get your things. You're done." "What?" Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "You heard me. You're fired. Clean out your locker and get out." The silence that followed was deafening. "Mrs." Rose sobbed quietly in the corner while other customers shuffled uncomfortably. Hannah stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her dismissal settling over her like a heavy blanket. With as much dignity as she could muster, Hannah walked to the back office to collect her belongings. Her hands shook as she emptied her small locker. A coffee mug Martha had given her, a sweater, a few personal items that seemed so insignificant now that her job was gone. As she packed everything into a cardboard box, the reality of her situation hit her. Martha's chemotherapy treatments were draining their savings. The medical bills kept piling up. This job had been their lifeline. And now? Hannah emerged from the back office carrying her box, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. As she walked past the counter where Mrs. Rose still stood, she paused. "The insulin?" she said quietly, pulling out her card again. "Let me still help with—" "Absolutely not." Howard blocked her path. "You don't work here anymore. You have no business making transactions." It was then, in her most vulnerable moment, that Hannah did something that would change everything. She looked at Mrs. Rose, then at the other customers watching the scene unfold, and whispered words that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her memory. "The angels don't rush, you know. They wait for the right time to help the right people." Richard Whitmore's knees nearly buckled. The phrase, those exact words, hit him like a physical blow. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way she said angels, with a slight, almost childlike inflection. It was the unconscious way she touched that small scar on her forehead. It was the tilt of her head, the shape of her hands, the color of her eyes. 23 years of searching. 23 years of visiting pharmacy after pharmacy based on a psychic's cryptic prediction that his daughter would be taking care of sick people. 23 years of hoping, praying, and slowly losing his mind with grief and guilt. And here she was, his Ellie. Hannah walked toward the door, her cardboard box clutched against her chest. As she passed Richard, he caught a whiff of her perfume, something light and floral that reminded him of the lavender soap his wife Rachel used to buy for their daughter. The bell above the door chimed as Hannah stepped out into the December rain. Richard watched through the window as she hurried down the sidewalk, her figure becoming smaller in the distance. His phone was in his hand before he realized he'd reached for it. With trembling fingers, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he'd used countless times over the years. "Collins, it's Richard Whitmore. I need you at Bridgeport Pharmacy right now." His voice was barely steady. God help me, Mark. I think I found her." Through the rain-streaked window, Richard watched Hannah disappear around the corner, carrying her small cardboard box and all the broken pieces of a life she didn't even know wasn't really hers. The angels, it seemed, had finally decided it was time. Detective Mark Collins arrived at Bridgeport Pharmacy within 30 minutes, his weathered face showing the concern of a man who'd spent 15 years watching his friend slowly consume himself with an impossible search. At 50, Mark had investigated missing persons cases that would haunt most people for life. But nothing had prepared him for Richard Whitmore's obsession. "You sounded different on the phone," Mark said, studying Richard's face as they stood outside the pharmacy. "What happened in there?" Richard's hands were still shaking as he lit his third cigarette in 20 minutes. She said it. "Mark," the exact phrase, "the angels don't rush. They wait for the right time to help the right people." His voice cracked. Those were Ellie's words. She used to say that when she was 5, 6 years old, I used to tell her stories about guardian angels. And she'd always say that back to me. Mark had heard Richard mention this phrase before, but seeing his friend's reaction now was different. Raw, desperate. "Richard, you know how many times we've been down this road?" "No." Richard's voice was firm. "This is different. Everything about her. The way she moves. The scar on her forehead. Even the way she touches it when she's nervous." "Mark, I followed her home." "You what?" "I had to. I stayed back. Didn't approach her. But I saw where she lives. And Mark..." Richard took a deep breath. Martha Bennett answered the door. The name hit Mark like a punch to the gut. Martha Bennett, Rachel's sister. The woman who'd disappeared the same night Richard's family was destroyed. The woman who'd vanished without a trace after the accident, leaving behind only questions and suspicions. "Are you absolutely certain?" 23 years older. Sick looking. But it's her. It's definitely Martha. Mark pulled out his phone, already making mental notes. "I'll start running background checks tonight. Full investigation. Financial records, medical records, everything. If this Hannah Clarke is who you think she is, she is." Richard's certainty was absolute. "I know it sounds crazy, but I feel it. She's my daughter, Mark, my Ellie." The next morning, Richard returned to Bridgeport Pharmacy at opening time. Howard Avery was behind the counter, his mood noticeably brighter than the previous day. "We're closed for renovations," Howard called out without looking up. "Actually, I'm here on business." Richard straightened his tie and approached the counter with the confidence of a man who'd built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing. "My name is Richard Whitmore, CEO of Hartwell Pharmacies. I'd like to discuss purchasing this establishment." Howard's head snapped up so fast, Richard was surprised he didn't get whiplash. Hartwell, you're Richard Whitmore. That's right. I'm launching a new community outreach initiative, focusing on pharmacies in underserved neighborhoods. This location fits our criteria perfectly. Richard pulled out a business card. I'm prepared to offer you 3 times the current market value, with the understanding that all current employment arrangements would be honored and expanded upon. Howard's eyes went wide. Richard could practically see dollar signs reflecting in them. 3 times market value. That's impossible. Why would you? Community investment, Mr. Avery. Good business. Good karma. Richard's smile was practiced, professional. There is one condition, however. I understand you recently dismissed an employee, Hannah Clarke. I'd like her reinstated immediately as the new manager. Hannah, but she... Mr. Avery, are you interested in my offer or not? Howard's greed won over his confusion. Yes, absolutely. When can we finalize this? My lawyers will contact you this afternoon. I'd like Ms. Clarke to start tomorrow. 3 hours later. Hannah was staring at her phone in disbelief. Howard's voice sounded strained and overly cheerful as he explained the incredible opportunity that had fallen into her lap. This is insane, Hannah said to Martha as she hung up. Yesterday he fires me. Today he wants me back as manager, with a 40% raise. Martha looked up from her crossword puzzle, her chemotherapy-weakened hands trembling slightly as she set down her pen. At 67, the cancer had aged her rapidly, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. Sometimes good things happen to good people, sweetheart, Martha said, though something flickered across her face, a shadow of concern that Hannah didn't catch. But the timing is so weird. This big CEO just happens to want to buy Howard's pharmacy the day after I get fired. What are the odds? Martha's grip tightened on her pen. Life is full of coincidences, Hannah. Don't question a blessing. Hannah accepted the job, partly because she needed the money and partly because something about the whole situation intrigued her. The next morning, she arrived at the pharmacy to find everything subtly different. New equipment, updated computer systems, and a corporate efficiency that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. What she didn't expect was to find Richard Whitmore himself restocking shelves. Mr. Whitmore, Hannah approached cautiously. I'm Hannah Clarke, the new manager. I didn't expect to see you here personally. Richard looked up, and for a moment, Hannah saw something in his eyes that made her stomach flutter. A mixture of joy, pain, and something that looked almost like recognition. Ms. Clarke, it's wonderful to meet you properly. His voice was gentle, almost reverent. I like to be hands-on with our community partnerships. I hope you don't mind if I spend some time here over the next few weeks, getting a feel for the neighborhood. Hannah nodded, though something about his intensity made her uncomfortable. Of course, can I ask, why did you specifically want me rehired? Howard mentioned you insisted on it. Richard's pause was just a beat too long. I heard about what happened yesterday with Mrs. Rose. That kind of compassion is exactly what we want to represent in our community outreach. Over the following days, Richard became a regular presence at the pharmacy. He claimed to be observing operations, but Hannah noticed he spent most of his time watching her, not in a creepy way, more like he was studying her, trying to memorize every detail, and the details were what made Richard's heart race and break simultaneously. Hannah organized the medications by color and size, exactly the way 6-year-old Ellie had organized her toys. She hummed constantly while working, always the same melody, the lullaby Richard used to sing to his daughter every night. She was left-handed, just like Ellie, and when Richard casually mentioned having chocolate donuts in the break room, Hannah's face went pale. I'm allergic, she said quickly. Severe reaction. I can't even be around chocolate sometimes. Richard's hands trembled as he made a note in his phone. Chocolate allergy was rare, affecting less than 1% of the population. Ellie had been rushed to the hospital at age 4 after accidentally eating a chocolate chip cookie at a birthday party. The most telling moment came during a thunderstorm that hit on Hannah's 3rd day back. The rain pounded against the windows just like it had the day she was fired, but this time, Hannah's reaction was visceral. She went pale, started breathing heavily, and actually retreated to the bathroom. Richard found her there 10 minutes later, sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up to her chest, humming that same melody over and over. Hannah, are you all right? She looked up at him with those familiar green eyes, now wide with an anxiety she couldn't explain. "I hate storms. I know it's stupid. Oh, but I've always, ever since I was little, they terrify me." Richard's heart shattered. Ellie had developed a phobia of thunderstorms after witnessing a particularly violent one when she was 4. The night she disappeared, it had been storming. "It's not stupid at all," he said gently, crouching down beside her. "Would it help if I stayed here until it passes?" Hannah nodded gratefully, and for 20 minutes they sat in the small bathroom. While the storm raged outside, Richard found himself humming along to her melody, the lullaby he'd written for his daughter 23 years ago. Hannah looked at him in surprise. "You know that song?" Richard's throat tightened. It's an old song. My mother used to sing it to me." That evening, Richard met Mark Collins at a diner across town. The detective's expression was grim as he spread files across the table. "You're not going to like what I found," Mark said without preamble. Martha Bennett legally changed her name in 2003. Before that, she was Martha Whitmore. Whitmore. Richard's blood ran cold. She took Rachel's married name. That's not all. She withdrew her entire life savings, $47,000 in cash, on December 15, 2001, 3 days after your family's accident. Then she disappeared completely for 2 years. And she resurfaced in Chicago in 2003, renting a small apartment in Bridgeport with a little girl she claimed was her niece. A girl she said had been orphaned and traumatized, which explained why the child couldn't remember her past clearly. Richard's hands clenched into fists. "She took her. Martha took my daughter and created a whole new identity for her. It looks that way. I'm still digging, but Richard, if Hannah is really Ellie, then Martha Bennett committed kidnapping. This isn't just a family reunion. It's a criminal case." Richard stared at the files. 23 years of searching suddenly crystallizing into a truth more painful than he'd ever imagined. His daughter had been alive all this time, living just a few hundred miles away, believing she was someone else entirely. "What do we do now?" he whispered. "We get proof, DNA, more evidence, and then," Mark's voice was gentle, "then we figure out how to tell a 29-year-old woman that her entire life has been a lie." Outside the diner, the December wind howled through the Chicago streets, carrying with it the promise of revelations that would shatter and rebuild a family that had been broken for far too long. The nightmares were getting worse. Hannah jolted awake at 3:17 a.m., her heart hammering against her ribs as the familiar images dissolved into the darkness of her bedroom. The white mansion with its towering columns, the sound of a music box playing a melody that made her chest ache with longing, and always, that voice, warm and gentle, whispering words she could never quite remember when she woke. She stumbled to the kitchen for a glass of water, her hands still trembling from the dream. Martha was asleep in the living room, too weak from chemotherapy to climb the stairs to her bedroom anymore. The cancer was winning, and they both knew it. Hannah paused in the doorway, watching Martha's labored breathing in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Even in sleep, Martha's face was etched with worry lines that seemed to have deepened over the past week, ever since Hannah had returned to work at the pharmacy. "Can't sleep again." Martha's voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. The pain keeps me up." Martha shifted carefully on the couch. "The same dream?" Hannah nodded, settling into the armchair beside her. "It's getting more vivid. I can almost see faces now, but they're always just out of focus. And that music box, I swear I can hear it even when I'm awake sometimes." Something flickered across Martha's face, an expression Hannah couldn't quite read. Fear, guilt. "Dreams are just dreams, sweetheart. Your mind trying to process stress. You've been through a lot this week with the job situation." "Maybe." Hannah pulled her knees up to her chest. "But it feels like more than that. Like my brain is trying to tell me something important. Something I'm supposed to remember." Martha's breathing grew more labored. "Some things are better left forgotten, Hannah. Sometimes our minds protect us from memories that would only cause pain." The next morning at the pharmacy, Hannah found herself watching Richard Whitmore with growing curiosity. He'd been there every day for a week now, always finding reasons to help with inventory or reorganize displays. His attention to detail was obsessive, He'd spent 2 hours yesterday ensuring the children's vitamins were arranged by both alphabetical order and dosage strength. You know, most CEOs don't personally stock shelves, Hannah commented as she found him meticulously organizing the cold medicine section. Richard paused, a bottle of cough syrup in his hand. I believe in understanding every aspect of my business. You can't make good decisions from an ivory tower. Fair enough. But you've been here every day. Don't you have other pharmacies to visit? The question seemed to catch him off guard. This location is special to me. The community outreach aspect makes it a priority. Hannah nodded, but something in his tone felt off. She'd noticed other things too. The way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. How he seemed to know exactly how she liked to organize things before she told him. The way his voice got softer whenever he spoke directly to her. Around noon, Mrs. Rose shuffled in, moving slowly with her walker. Her face lit up when she saw Hannah behind the counter. "Hannah, dear, I heard you got your job back. And a promotion, too. News travels fast in this neighborhood." Hannah laughed, genuinely happy to see the elderly woman looking better. "How's your granddaughter doing?" "Much better, thanks to you. I still can't believe that nice man paid for her insulin after what happened." Hannah's smile faltered. "What nice man?" "The gentleman in the expensive suit. He was here that day you got fired, after you left. He went to Howard and paid for Emma's prescription. The full amount." Mrs. Rose patted Hannah's hand. "Said it was what you would have wanted." Hannah's eyes immediately found Richard, who was suddenly very interested in straightening the blood pressure monitors. The timeline was too convenient, the gesture too personal. "Mrs. Rose, can you describe this man?" "Oh, handsome fellow, salt and pepper hair, very well dressed, had kind eyes, but sad ones too, like he'd lost something precious." Hannah's gaze lingered on Richard for the rest of the day, when he finally left at closing time. She made a decision that would change everything. That evening brought another violent thunderstorm to Chicago. The wind howled through the streets of Bridgeport, rattling windows and sending trash cans tumbling down the sidewalks. Hannah was helping Martha with her evening medications when the first crack of thunder shook the house. The effect was immediate and devastating. Hannah dropped the pill bottle, her face going white, as panic seized her chest. The sound triggered something deep in her memory. Flashes of images that came too fast to process. Rain against windows. Screaming. The smell of twisted metal and... "Hannah." Martha's voice cut through the chaos in her mind. "Breathe, sweetheart. You're safe." But Hannah wasn't safe. She was spiraling into a full panic attack, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps, as another rumble of thunder sent shockwaves through her nervous system. Without thinking, she ran upstairs and locked herself in the bathroom, sliding down the door to sit on the cold tile floor. The storm raged for over an hour. Hannah sat there, humming the melody from her dreams over and over, the one that always calmed her down when she was scared. She didn't notice Martha standing outside the door, listening with tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, across town, Richard was pacing his downtown penthouse like a caged animal. The storm was triggering his own memories. The night 23 years ago when everything fell apart. The fight with Rachel. The things they'd said that could never be taken back. The moment she'd grabbed Ellie and run out into the storm, his phone rang. Mark Collins. "I've got more information," the detective said without preamble. "And Richard, some of this is going to be hard to hear. Tell me." I tracked down the original investigating officers from the accident, Detective Williams. He's retired now, but he remembers the case. Said there were always questions about Martha Bennett's disappearance. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of questions? She was supposed to give a statement about Rachel's state of mind that night. According to Williams, Martha called 911 to report Rachel and Ellie missing around 2 a.m. But when officers arrived at her house to take the statement, she was gone. Neighbors saw her loading suitcases into her car around dawn. She ran. Gets worse. I pulled Martha's financial records from 2001. She made several large cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to the accident, almost like she was preparing to disappear. Richard's blood ran cold. "You think she planned this?" "I think Martha Bennett knew more about what happened that night than she ever told police. And I think she made a decision that destroyed your family." The next morning, Hannah arrived at work early, hoping to catch Richard before the pharmacy opened. She found him in the back office, studying inventory reports with an intensity that seemed excessive for vitamin counts. "Mr. Whitmore, could I speak with you for a moment?" He looked up, and Hannah was struck again by how his eyes seemed to light up whenever he saw her. It was almost like he was seeing someone else entirely. "Of course, please, sit down." Hannah remained standing, her arms crossed. "Mrs. Rose told me something interesting yesterday. About someone paying for her granddaughter's insulin the day I was fired." Richard's face went carefully neutral. "That was very generous of whoever did it. It was you, wasn't it?" The silence stretched between them for several heartbeats. Finally, Richard nodded. "Why?" Hannah's voice was softer now, more confused than accusatory. "You didn't even know me then." Richard's answer came slowly, as if he was weighing each word. "Sometimes we're called to help people, Hannah. Sometimes we see someone doing good in the world and we want to support that. But you bought the entire pharmacy just to get me rehired. That's not normal business behavior." "No, it's not." Richard stood up, moving closer to her. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah nodded, though every instinct told her she was about to hear something that would change everything. "Do you ever feel like you're looking for something, but you don't know what it is?" The question hit Hannah like a physical blow. It was exactly how she'd felt her entire life, like she was missing some essential piece of herself. "Every day," she whispered. "So do I." Richard's voice was barely audible. "For 23 years, I've been looking for something I lost, something precious that was taken from me." Hannah's heart was racing now. "What did you lose?" Richard opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the front door chimed. Howard Avery walked in, followed by two men in suits who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Hannah, we need to talk," Howard said, his voice tight with anxiety. "These gentlemen are from corporate. There are some irregularities in the sale paperwork that need to be sorted out." But Hannah wasn't listening to Howard. She was staring at Richard, whose face had gone pale at the interruption. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever he'd been about to tell her would have answered every question she'd ever had about herself. The storm from the night before had passed, but Hannah could feel another one building, one that would shake the very foundation of everything she thought she knew about her life. And at the center of it all was Richard Whitmore, a man who looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered into the darkness. Dr. Paul Bennett had been Martha's oncologist for 18 months, but he'd never seen her this agitated. She sat in his office chair, her frail hands gripping the armrests as she spoke in rapid, disjointed sentences that made him wonder if the cancer had spread to her brain. "He's found us, Paul. After all these years, he's found us." Martha's voice was barely above a whisper, but the fear in it was palpable. "I saw him watching the house yesterday, just sitting in his car across the street, staring at our front door." "Martha, slow down. Who found you?" "Richard. Richard Whitmore." The name came out like a curse. Hannah's real father." Paul Bennett nearly dropped his coffee mug. In all their sessions, Martha had never mentioned that Hannah wasn't her biological daughter. He'd always assumed the young woman was her niece, as she'd indicated on the medical forms. "What are you talking about?" Martha's story poured out in a torrent of guilt and desperation. The accident 23 years ago, Rachel's death, the decision to take Ellie, Hannah, and run, the years of hiding, the false identity, the constant fear that someday the truth would surface. "I thought I was protecting her," Martha said, tears streaming down her gaunt cheeks. "Richard was never there, always traveling, always working. Rachel was so lonely, so scared she told me things, about his temper, about how he'd get when he was angry. Martha, you're telling me you kidnapped a child." "I saved her." Martha's voice cracked. "That night, Rachel came to me terrified. She was leaving him, taking Ellie away. But then the accident happened, and I was alone with this traumatized little girl who kept asking for her mama. What was I supposed to do? Send her back to a man who'd driven her mother to run away?" Paul sat back in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. "How long do you have?" "What? How long do you have to live, Martha? Be honest with me." Martha's face crumpled. "You said weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky." And Hannah has no idea. None. She thinks she's an orphan. The amnesia from the trauma wiped out most of her early memories. She remembers fragments, dreams, mostly, but nothing concrete. Paul rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of this secret settling on his shoulders. Martha, this man has been looking for his daughter for 23 years. If he's found you, he can't take her away from me. Not now. Not when I'm dying. Martha's voice was desperate. She's all I have, Paul. She's my whole world. And she's his daughter. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Meanwhile, at the pharmacy, Richard was conducting his own investigation with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent decades building a business empire. He'd arrived before opening time and was carefully examining every personal item Hannah had brought to work. Her coffee mug, the small succulent plant on her desk, the way she'd organized her workspace. But it was the discovery in her desk drawer that made his hands shake uncontrollably. A small plastic bag containing what looked like broken pieces of ceramic, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Richard's heart stopped as he recognized the fragments, pieces of a music box, one with a tiny ballerina that had once spun to the melody of Fluorescent. He'd given that music box to Ellie for her 6th birthday, just 2 months before she disappeared. Mr. Whitmore. Hannah's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, her coat still damp from the morning drizzle. You're here early. Richard quickly closed the drawer, his mind racing. I wanted to review the quarterly reports before we opened. Hannah approached her desk, and Richard noticed how her eyes immediately went to the drawer he'd been examining. Is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. Richard's voice was strained. Hannah, can I ask you about something personal? She tensed. Depends on what it is. Those ceramic pieces in your desk drawer. They look like they're from something important. Hannah's face went pale. How did you... She stopped herself, then sighed. I've had them since I was little. Martha says I was clutching them when she first took me in. She thinks they're from a music box that got broken in whatever accident took my parents. Richard's throat tightened. Do you remember anything about it? Sometimes I dream about it. There was a song it played, and a little ballerina that danced in circles. But it's all so vague, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. What song? Hannah hummed a few bars of Fluorescent, the same melody Richard had heard her humming countless times over the past weeks. The melody he'd listened to every night for 6 years as he tucked his daughter into bed. Fluorescent, Richard whispered. Hannah's eyes widened. You know it. It's a classic. Beethoven. Richard's voice was barely steady. Hannah, I need to ask you something else. Have you ever thought about taking a DNA test? For medical reasons, I mean. With Martha's cancer, it might be good to know your genetic history. The suggestion seemed to come out of nowhere, and Hannah's expression shifted from curious to suspicious. Why would you suggest that? I just think, Mr. Whitmore, what's really going on here? Hannah's voice was sharp now. You buy this pharmacy specifically to rehire me. You show up every day to watch me work. You pay for Mrs. Rose's prescription before you even know me. And now you're suggesting I take DNA tests. What aren't you telling me? Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the phone rang. Hannah answered it. Hannah? Her face growing increasingly concerned as she listened. Yes, I'll be right there, she said, hanging up. I have to go. That was Martha's doctor. She's had some kind of episode. Richard watched her grab her coat and rush out, his heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. As soon as she was gone, he pulled out his phone and called Mark Collins. I need you to get me everything you can on Dr. Paul Bennett, Richard said. He's Martha's oncologist, and I think he might know more than he's letting on. Already on it, Mark replied. But Richard, I've got something else. I tracked down one of the paramedics who responded to Rachel's accident. He's willing to talk. An hour later, Richard sat across from Tommy Morrison in a diner on Chicago's South Side. Tommy was in his 60s now, retired from the paramedic service. But his memory of that December night 23 years ago was crystal clear. I'll never forget that call, Tommy said, stirring sugar into his coffee. Single vehicle accident. Car went over the guardrail in the storm. Driver was already gone when we got there. But the weird thing was, there was evidence of a second passenger. What kind of evidence? Child's car seat in the back, still buckled in. Looked like someone had been sitting there recently. There were crackers scattered around. A juice box, little girl's hair tie on the floor, but no child at the scene. Richard's pulse quickened. What did the police think? That's where it gets interesting. When we radioed it in, dispatch said they'd already received a call about the missing child. Woman named Martha Bennett had reported her niece missing around the same time as the accident. Said the little girl had been with her sister, and now both of them were gone. But Martha called before the accident was discovered. That's what never made sense to me. How did she know to report them missing if she wasn't at the scene? And why report the child missing if she thought they were together? Richard felt the pieces clicking into place. Unless she already had the child. That's what I always wondered. But I was just a paramedic. Wasn't my job to investigate. That evening, Richard found himself parked outside the small house in Bridgeport. Watching the windows glow with warm yellow light, he could see Hannah moving around inside. Her silhouette visible through the thin curtains. The urge to knock on the door, to tell her everything, was almost overwhelming. But he also knew that the truth would destroy her world. The woman she'd called mother for 23 years was dying, and that same woman had stolen her from her real family. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been built on a lie? His phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Got the DNA results from the hair samples. It's confirmed, Richard. Hannah Clarke is your daughter. Richard stared at the message until the words blurred. 23 years of searching, of hoping, of slowly going insane with grief and guilt. And now, finally, he had proof. But proof wasn't enough. He needed Hannah to know the truth, and he needed Martha to confess. The question was how to make that happen before Martha's cancer took away their last chance for answers. Inside the house, Hannah was helping Martha with her evening medications when the older woman suddenly grabbed her hand. "Hannah, there's something I need to tell you," Martha said, her voice weak but urgent. "Something about your past, about where you came from." Hannah's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Martha looked toward the window, where Richard's car was barely visible in the darkness. "There are things I've kept from you, sweetheart. Things I thought I was protecting you from. But maybe it's time you knew the truth." Outside, Richard watched the two figures in the window, unaware that the moment he'd been waiting for his entire adult life was finally about to arrive. Martha's words hung in the air like a death sentence. But before she could continue, a violent coughing fit seized her frail body. Blood speckled the tissue she pressed to her lips, and Hannah's moment of anticipation dissolved into immediate concern. "Martha, we need to get you to the hospital," Hannah said, reaching for her phone. "No." Martha's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. "No hospitals, not tonight, I need to tell you." Another coughing fit cut her off. This one so severe that Hannah ignored her protests and called 911. Within minutes, the small house was filled with paramedics, their professional voices cutting through Hannah's panic as they stabilized Martha and prepared her for transport. At the hospital, Dr. Paul Bennett met them in the emergency room, his face grim as he reviewed Martha's charts. The cancer had accelerated, he explained to Hannah. They were looking at days, maybe a week at most. "She was trying to tell me something important," Hannah said, sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Martha's bed. "Something about my past." Dr. Bennett exchanged a meaningful look with Martha, who was now conscious but heavily sedated. "Sometimes when people are facing the end, they feel compelled to settle accounts." "What does that mean?" "It means," Martha said weakly, "that I've been carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear." Outside Martha's hospital room, Richard paced the hallway like a caged animal. He'd followed the ambulance, his heart breaking as he watched Hannah's frightened face through the emergency room windows. Now standing just feet away from the truth he'd been seeking for 23 years, he felt paralyzed. Dr. Bennett emerged from the room and approached him with the wary expression of a man who'd been thrust into an impossible situation. "Mr. Whitmore, I presume?" Richard nodded. "How is she?" "Dying. And she knows it." Paul gestured toward a quiet corner of the hallway. "She's been asking for you. For me. She says it's time. That Hannah deserves to know the truth. And that she can't face her maker carrying this burden." Paul's voice was heavy with exhaustion. "But she wants to tell you first." "Alone." Richard's hands trembled as he entered Martha's room. The woman who had destroyed his family lay there, barely recognizable from the vibrant, opinionated sister-in-law he'd known 23 years ago. Cancer had reduced her to a shadow, but her eyes still held the same fierce protectiveness that had driven her to commit the unthinkable. "Hello, Richard," Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Martha." He pulled a chair close to her bed. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" "She's getting coffee. We have maybe 10 minutes before she comes back." Martha struggled to sit up higher. "I need you to understand something before I tell her the truth. I need you to know why I did what I did. You stole my child. I saved her." Martha's eyes flashed with the old fire. "That night, Richard, the night Rachel died, do you remember what happened before she left?" Richard's face darkened. "We had a fight. She wanted to leave me, take Ellie to Spain. She'd been lying to me for months, making up stories about another man. She was desperate," Martha said. "You were never home, Richard. Ellie would ask me if she really had a daddy because she barely saw you. Rachel felt like a single mother married to a ghost. That doesn't justify—" "Let me finish." Martha's breathing grew labored, but she pressed on. "Rachel came to me that night, crying, terrified. She said you'd found out about the separation papers and had exploded. She was scared, Richard, scared of what you might do." Richard recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "I never hurt her. I never would have hurt either of them. But you had a temper. Rachel showed me the bruises on her wrists from where you grabbed her during the fight." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He remembered that night, the rage that had consumed him when he'd discovered Rachel's lies about the other man, about wanting to take Ellie away. He remembered grabbing her arms, shaking her, demanding to know how long she'd been planning to destroy their family. "I was angry," he whispered, "but I never meant to hurt her. Rachel was afraid you'd take Ellie away from her if she tried to leave legally. She begged me to keep Ellie safe while she went back to face you, to try to work things out." Martha's tears were flowing freely now. "She said if anything happened to her, I should take Ellie somewhere safe until the dust settled. But she died in that accident. You should have brought Ellie home." "To what?" "To a man who'd grabbed her mother hard enough to leave bruises. To a father who was so consumed with work that his 6-year-old daughter barely knew him." Martha's voice grew stronger with conviction. "Ellie was traumatized, Richard. She'd lost her mother. She was asking for her constantly, and she was terrified of loud noises and storms. How was I supposed to know you wouldn't hurt her too?" Richard buried his face in his hands. "So you ran." "I panicked. I took her and ran. And by the time I realized I might have made a mistake, it was too late. She'd forgotten so much, suppressed the trauma. Creating a new identity for her seemed kinder than forcing her to remember a life that had ended in such pain. 23 years, Martha. 23 years I've been looking for her, blaming myself, thinking she was dead. And 23 years I've been watching her grow into a beautiful, caring woman who helps people and makes the world better just by being in it." Martha's voice was fierce despite her weakness. "Can you honestly tell me she would have been better off with you back then? With your anger and your absence and your guilt?" The question hung between them like a knife. Richard wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth was devastating. In the aftermath of Rachel's death, he'd been consumed with grief and rage. He'd thrown himself even deeper into work, using business as an escape from the pain. Would he have been capable of raising a traumatized 6-year-old? Would he have had the patience and love that Martha had shown Hannah? "She deserves to know who she really is," Richard said finally. "Yes, she does. That's why I'm telling you now." Martha reached under her pillow and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. "I've kept these for her, her real birth certificate, photos from before the accident, and this." She opened the box to reveal a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny photo of Richard, Rachel, and 6-year-old Ellie, taken at Christmas just weeks before the tragedy. "She wore this the night she came to me," Martha said. "I took it off her when we started over, thinking it would make the transition easier, but I could never bring myself to throw it away." Richard's hands shook as he took the locket. The photo was exactly as he remembered. Ellie's gap-toothed grin, Rachel's radiant smile, his own arm wrapped protectively around his family. It was the last picture they'd ever taken together. "There's something else," Martha said. "A letter. Rachel wrote it that night, before she left to go back to you. She wanted me to give it to you if anything happened to her." She handed him a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Richard's name was written across the front in Rachel's familiar handwriting. "What does it say?" "I don't know. I never opened it. That was between you and her." Richard stared at the envelope, afraid of what truths it might contain. Before he could open it, Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Hannah was returning. "She's coming back," Martha said urgently. "Richard, I need you to promise me something. When I tell her the truth, when her world falls apart, be patient with her. She's going to be angry and confused and hurt. Don't try to force a relationship. Let her come to you in her own time. I promise. And Richard," Martha's voice was growing weaker, "despite everything, despite the pain I've caused you, I want you to know that I love that girl like she was my own daughter. Every decision I made, right or wrong, was because I wanted to protect her." The door opened, and Hannah walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She stopped short when she saw Richard, her eyes immediately suspicious. "Mr. Whitmore, what are you doing here?" Martha struggled to sit up straighter. "I asked him to come, sweetheart. Please, sit down, both of you. It's time you knew the truth about who you really are." Hannah's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the hospital floor as she stared at the 2 adults who held the keys to a past she'd never known existed. Outside the window, Chicago's lights twinkled in the darkness, unaware that in this small hospital room, a family was about to be reborn from the ashes of 23 years of secrets and lies. The coffee spread across the hospital floor like spilled blood, but Hannah barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on Martha's face, searching for some sign that this was all an elaborate joke, a misunderstanding, anything but the earth-shattering truth she could feel building in the silence. "Sit down, Hannah," Martha said gently, her voice carrying the weight of 23 years of buried secrets. "I don't want to sit down." Hannah's voice was sharp, defensive. "I want to know why he's here, why you asked him to come." Richard started to speak, but Martha held up a trembling hand. "This is my story to tell first." She looked at Hannah with eyes full of love and regret. "Sweetheart, everything I'm about to say is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen. Really listen, before you react." Hannah remained standing, her arms crossed protectively across her chest. "Just tell me." Martha took a shuddering breath. "Your name isn't Hannah Clarke. It's Ellie Whitmore. And this man, Richard Whitmore, is your father." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the wall to steady herself. "That's not possible. You were 6 years old when you came to live with me," Martha continued, tears streaming down her face. "Your mother, Rachel, was my sister. She died in a car accident on December 12th, 2001, during a terrible storm." "No." Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "No, you're lying. My parents died when I was little, but you said I was your niece. That, I lied." The admission seemed to tear something vital from Martha's chest. "I created Hannah Clarke because I thought I was protecting you, because I thought Richard was dangerous." Hannah's eyes snapped to Richard, who sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of anguish. "You knew," she said, her voice growing louder. "That's why you've been watching me, following me. You knew who I was." "I suspected," Richard said quietly. "The way you hummed that melody, the phrase about angels, your mannerisms, but I wasn't certain until what?" Richard pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph, a DNA test result. "I had your hair tested, from your brush at the pharmacy." Hannah stared at the screen, the scientific proof of her identity swimming before her eyes. "Match probability, 99,097%. You tested my DNA without my permission." "Hannah, please try to understand." "Understand what?" Her voice cracked with rage and disbelief. "That my entire life has been a lie. That the woman I called my mother kidnapped me. That my real father has been stalking me for weeks without telling me who he was." Martha struggled to sit up higher. "I wasn't stalking you. I was trying to find the right way to—" "There is no right way." Hannah spun around to face Martha. 23 years. You let me believe I was an orphan for 23 years. Do you have any idea what that's like? Growing up thinking you have no family, no history, no identity? "I am your family," Martha said desperately. "I raised you. I loved you. You stole me!" The words erupted from Hannah with such force that both Richard and Martha flinched. "You stole me from my real father and created a fake life." Richard stood up slowly. "Hannah, please let Martha explain." "Don't." Hannah held up her hand, her voice dangerously quiet. "Don't you dare defend her. And don't you dare try to play the concerned father now. Where were you? If you're really my father, where have you been my whole life? Looking for you, Richard said simply. Every single day for 23 years, I've been looking for you. Martha opened the wooden box with trembling hands. Hannah, look at these, please. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Hannah as a baby, as a toddler, as a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. And in every photo, she was with Richard and a beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Hannah's legs gave out. She sank into the chair, staring at the images of a life she couldn't remember but somehow recognized. The faces were familiar in a way that made her chest ache with longing. That's your mother, Martha said softly, pointing to the dark-haired woman. Rachel, my sister. Hannah picked up one of the photos, herself at maybe 5 years old, sitting on Richard's shoulders at what looked like a carnival. She was laughing, her small hands tangled in his hair, and he was looking up at her with such pure adoration that it made Hannah's heart break. I don't remember, she whispered. I don't remember any of this. The trauma, Richard said gently. After your mother died, after everything that happened, your mind protected you by forgetting. Hannah looked up at him through tears. What happened that night? Why did she die? Why did Martha take me? Martha and Richard exchanged a loaded glance. Finally, Martha spoke. Your parents had been having problems. Your father traveled a lot for work, and your mother felt alone. That night, they had a terrible fight. About what? About me wanting to leave, Richard said, his voice thick with guilt. Your mother had filed separation papers. She said she was taking you to Spain, starting over. I didn't handle it well. Hannah saw something flicker across Martha's face. What aren't you telling me? Martha hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Your mother came to me that night, terrified. She had bruises on her wrists from where Richard had grabbed her during the fight. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Hannah looked at Richard, searching his face for denial, for explanation. I was angry, Richard admitted, his voice barely audible. Angrier than I'd ever been. When I found out she was planning to take you away, to disappear with you, I lost control. I grabbed her, tried to make her listen. I never meant to hurt her, but you did. Hannah's voice was flat, emotionless. Yes, I did, Martha continued, her words coming faster now, as if a dam had burst. Rachel asked me to keep you safe while she went back to talk to Richard, to try to work things out. She said if anything happened to her, I should protect you. And then, her voice broke. Then the police called. She'd driven off the road in the storm. The car went over a guardrail. Hannah was silent for a long moment, processing the devastating narrative of her origins. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. So you decided I'd be better off with you than with him. You were 6 years old and traumatized, Martha said defensively. You kept asking for your mama, having nightmares. I thought Richard might hurt you too, might take his anger out on you. So you stole me and created a fake identity. I protected you. From what? Hannah's voice rose again. From my own father, from my real life. She stood up abruptly, the photos scattering to the floor. I can't process this right now. This is insane. Richard reached for her arm. Hannah, please. Don't touch me. She jerked away from him. Don't touch me and don't call me Hannah, apparently. That's not even my real name. Your name is Ellie, Richard said softly. Ellie Rose Whitmore. You were named after my grandmother. Something in his tone, the tenderness with which he spoke her real name, cracked something inside Hannah's chest. But the anger was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I need to get out of here, she said, heading for the door. Where are you going? Martha called after her, panic in her voice. Hannah paused in the doorway, looking back at the two people who had just destroyed every certainty in her life. I don't know. Somewhere I can think. Somewhere I can figure out who the hell I really am. Hannah, Ellie, please don't leave like this, Richard said desperately. Why not? You both lied to me my entire life. What's one more night of lies? She looked directly at Martha. How long do you have? What? How long do you have to live? Martha's face crumpled. Days, maybe a week. Hannah nodded curtly. Then we'll finish this conversation when I'm ready, not before. She walked out of the hospital room, leaving behind the photographs, the wooden box, and the two people who held the keys to a past she wasn't sure she wanted to remember. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, trying to make sense of the impossible. Her name was Ellie. She had a father who'd been searching for her for 23 years. The woman she'd called mother had kidnapped her out of misguided love, and somewhere in the buried depths of her memory, a little girl named Ellie was trying to remember how to come home. Hannah, Ellie, wandered the streets of Chicago like a ghost, her mind reeling from revelations that had shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. The December wind cut through her coat, but she barely felt the cold. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the chaos raging inside her head. She found herself at Millennium Park, sitting on a bench facing the frozen lake, watching the city lights reflect off the ice like fractured diamonds. The photographs from Martha's box were burned into her memory, images of a life she'd lived but couldn't remember, a family she'd belonged to but had been stolen from. Her phone buzzed constantly. Richard, Martha's doctor, even Detective Collins, whose number she didn't recognize but whose voicemails grew increasingly urgent. She ignored them all. On the first night, she checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, paying cash and registering under a fake name, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on her. She lay on the scratchy bedspread, staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to force her mind to remember something, anything, from before she was 7. Fragments came in dreams. A man's voice singing for Elise as gentle hands tucked her into bed, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, a woman with kind eyes reading stories about brave princesses. But the images were like trying to hold water. The harder she grasped for them, the faster they slipped away. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Richard kept vigil by Martha's bedside. Even though she was barely conscious, the guilt was eating him alive, not just for the fight with Rachel that had led to her death, but for the weeks he'd spent watching Hannah without telling her the truth. "She hates me," he said to Dr. Bennett during one of his check-ins. "Both of them hate me, and they have every right to." "Martha doesn't hate you," Paul replied, adjusting her IV drip. "She's scared of dying, scared of leaving Hannah alone, scared that she made the wrong choice 23 years ago." "Did she?" Paul was quiet for a long moment. "That's not for me to judge, but I will say this. Hannah is one of the most compassionate, stable people I've ever met. Whatever Martha did, however she did it, she raised an extraordinary woman." The words should have been comforting, but they only made Richard's chest ache more. He'd missed all of it. First words, first steps, first day of school, graduations, heartbreaks, triumphs, 23 years of his daughter's life, gone forever. On the second day, Detective Collins found Hannah at a 24-hour diner on the south side, nursing her 4th cup of coffee and staring blankly at a plate of untouched eggs. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from her before she could answer. "Let me guess. Richard sent you." "Actually, no, I came on my own." Mark signaled the waitress for coffee. "I've been working this case for 15 years, Hannah. I've watched your father slowly destroy himself looking for you." "My father." The words felt foreign in her mouth. "Funny how everyone keeps calling him that when I just found out he exists 3 days ago. He never stopped believing you were alive, even when the police declared you dead, even when everyone told him to move on. He kept looking. Do you know what he did every Christmas for 23 years? Hannah didn't answer, but she didn't tell him to leave either. He bought you presents every year, picked out gifts for whatever age you would have been, wrapped them, and put them under a tree in a house where no one lived anymore, just in case you came home." Despite herself, Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "That doesn't excuse what he did to my mother. Martha said he hurt her. Martha told you her version of the truth, but she wasn't there for the whole story." Mark pulled out a manila envelope. "This is Rachel's letter, the one she wrote the night she died. Martha gave it to your father, but he wanted you to read it first." Hannah stared at the envelope, afraid of what it might contain. With trembling fingers, she opened it and unfolded the pages covered in her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I need you to know the truth about tonight. About everything. I lied to you, about wanting to leave, about the other man, about taking Ellie to Spain. There was never another man. I made it all up because I was desperate and stupid, and I didn't know how else to get your attention. You've been so consumed with work, so absent from our lives, that Ellie asks me if other daddies come home every night like the daddies on TV. I felt like I was raising her alone, and I was angry and hurt, and I wanted you to feel what it would be like to lose us. But when you grabbed my arms tonight, when I saw the look in your eyes, I realized how cruel I'd been. You weren't angry because you wanted to control me. You were terrified because you thought you were losing your family. I saw your heart break when I told you those lies, and I couldn't live with that. I'm going to Martha's to get Ellie, and then I'm coming home to tell you the truth and beg your forgiveness. I want us to be a family again. I want you to be the father I know you can be, and I want to be the wife you deserve. If something happens to me before I can say this in person, please know that I love you. I've always loved you. And please don't blame yourself for tonight. The only thing you're guilty of is loving your family too much. Take care of our angel. Tell her every day that her mama loved her more than life itself. Forever yours, Rachel P.I.'s. Don't let Martha fill Ellie's head with stories about your temper. I was upset and said things I didn't mean. You're a good man, Richard, and you'll be a wonderful father if you just give yourself the chance. Hannah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother hadn't been running away. She'd been coming back. The fight hadn't been about abuse or control. It had been about 2 people who loved each other but had forgotten how to communicate. Martha never told him about this letter until 3 days ago, Mark said gently. She let him believe for 23 years that he was responsible for driving Rachel away. But he did hurt her. The bruises. From grabbing her arms during an argument. Not from hitting her. Not from abuse. From desperation. Mark leaned forward. Hannah, I'm not excusing what he did. Putting hands on someone in anger is never okay. But there's a difference between a moment of poor judgment and a pattern of violence. Hannah folded the letter carefully, her mind reeling with this new version of events. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the whole truth, not just the parts that Martha wanted you to know. And because in 3 days, that woman is going to die, and your father is going to lose the only chance he's ever had to explain himself to his daughter. On the 3rd day, Hannah woke up in the motel room feeling violently ill. At first, she thought it was stress and lack of proper food. But when the nausea persisted and she found herself dizzy and weak, a terrible possibility occurred to her. She bought a pregnancy test at a nearby pharmacy, her hands shaking as she paid the cashier, who looked at her with concern. Back in the motel bathroom, she waited the longest 3 minutes of her life. Positive. Hannah sank to the bathroom floor, staring at the test in disbelief. Daniel? She was carrying Daniel's baby. Sweet, steady Daniel, who had no idea that his girlfriend had just discovered her entire life was a lie. The irony was devastating. Here she was, about to become a mother herself, and she'd just learned that the woman who'd raised her had kidnapped her from her real parents. How was she supposed to navigate this impossible situation while growing a life inside her? Her phone rang. Dr. Bennett. Hannah, you need to come to the hospital now. She's asking for you. And Hannah, she doesn't have long. Hannah closed her eyes, one hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. I'll be there in an hour. There's one more thing. Your father is here too. He's been here for 3 days, waiting for you to come back. I know. Hannah, whatever you decide about your relationship with him, don't let Martha die thinking you hate her. Whatever she did wrong, she did it out of love. Hannah hung up and looked at herself in the cracked motel mirror. 3 days ago, she'd been Hannah Clarke, been orphaned pharmacy clerk. Now she was Ellie Whitmore, daughter of a business magnate, raised by the woman who'd kidnapped her, and pregnant with a child whose father didn't even know she existed. But as she gathered her things and headed back to Chicago, one thing became crystal clear. She couldn't face any of this alone. For the first time in 3 days, she had somewhere she needed to be. And for the first time in her life, she had a father waiting for her. Hannah arrived at the hospital to find Richard slumped in the waiting room chair, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, as his expensive suit wrinkled, and there was a hollow look in his eyes that spoke of 3 days of waiting and wondering if he'd lost his daughter forever. When he saw her, he stood up so quickly he nearly stumbled. Hannah, Ellie, I didn't know if you'd come back. I almost didn't. She sat down across from him, leaving space between them. How is she? Fading. Doctor, Bennett says it could be hours now. Richard's voice was hoarse. She's been asking for you constantly. Your name is the only thing she says clearly anymore. Hannah felt a stab of guilt that cut through her anger. Whatever Martha had done, she was still the woman who had raised her, loved her, been there for every scraped knee and broken heart. I need to see her. Of course, but Hannah, before you go in there. Richard hesitated. I have something that belongs to you. He pulled out the small gold locket Martha had given him. You were wearing this the night you came to live with Martha. She kept it all these years. Hannah took the locket with trembling fingers, opening it to reveal the tiny photograph of her family. The image triggered something deep in her memory, a flash of being lifted high in the air, the sound of laughter, feeling completely safe and loved. I remember this, she whispered. Not clearly, but I remember feeling happy in this moment. It was taken 3 weeks before your mother died. We'd just finished decorating the Christmas tree, and you were so excited about Santa coming that you couldn't sit still. Richard's voice was soft with memory. You made us take pictures with every combination of poses you could think of. For a moment, the anger and confusion faded, replaced by a bittersweet ache for a childhood she'd lost. Then reality crashed back in. I'm pregnant, she said abruptly. Richard's eyes widened. What? I found out yesterday. I'm pregnant with my boyfriend's baby, and I don't even know how to tell him that my entire identity is a lie. Hannah's voice cracked. How am I supposed to be a mother when I don't even know who I am? Richard sat back down, running his hands through his hair. Does Martha know? No, nobody knows except you, and I only told you because... She paused, surprised by her own honesty. Because I needed to tell someone, and you're the only person who knows the truth about everything. What's his name? Your boyfriend, Daniel Avery. He's a nurse at Memorial Hospital, and he's the most decent person I've ever met. Hannah's voice softened when she spoke of him. He loves me, and I love him. But how do I explain that the woman he fell in love with doesn't actually exist? You exist, Richard said firmly. Your name might have been different. Your history might have been hidden. But who you are, your kindness, your compassion, your strength, that's all real. That's all you. Before Hannah could respond, Dr. Bennett appeared in the doorway. She's awake and asking for you both. Martha looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Her skin gray and waxy, but her eyes still held the fierce love Hannah remembered from childhood. When Hannah approached the bed, Martha's face crumpled with relief. You came back, Martha whispered. I'm here. Hannah took Martha's frail hand, surprised by how instinctively the gesture came. Despite everything, this woman had been her mother for 23 years. I need to tell you something, Martha said, her voice barely audible. About the night you came to live with me. About what really happened. Richard moved closer to the bed. Martha, don't... No, she needs to know. Martha's grip on Hannah's hand tightened. That night, when your mama brought you to me, you weren't just scared. You were asking for your daddy. You kept saying, "Where's daddy? I want daddy." Even at 6 years old, traumatized and confused. You loved him. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. Then why? Because I was scared too. Scared of losing you. Scared of being alone. Scared that I'd made a terrible mistake. But mostly, I was scared that if I gave you back to him, you'd forget me completely. Martha's tears were flowing freely now. I was selfish, sweetheart. I loved you so much that I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. But really, I was just afraid of losing the only family I had left. The honesty was devastating, and somehow healing at the same time. Hannah squeezed Martha's hand. You were my mom. You'll always be my mom. Nothing can change that. But he's your father, Martha said, looking at Richard. And he's a good man. I know that now. I've been watching him this week, seeing how much he loves you, how patient he's been. Rachel was right about him in that letter. Richard stepped forward. Martha, you don't need to... Yes, I do. Martha struggled to sit up higher. Hannah, your father isn't perfect. He made mistakes, had a temper, wasn't always present, but he never stopped loving you, not for 1 day in 23 years. Over the next few hours, they sat together in Martha's room, sharing stories and filling in the gaps of 23 lost years. Hannah learned about Richard's business, his philanthropy, his lonely existence in a mansion he'd never been able to sell because it was the last place he'd been happy. Richard learned about Hannah's childhood with Martha, the struggles with money, the love despite the hardships, the way Martha had encouraged Hannah's compassion and independence. He saw how thoroughly Martha had loved his daughter, even as his heart broke for all the moments he'd missed. As evening approached, Martha grew weaker. Dr. Bennett warned them that she was entering the final stages. "There's something I need to ask you both," Martha said during one of her lucid moments. "I want to be buried next to Rachel. I know I don't deserve it, but..." "Of course," Richard said without hesitation. "You'll be with your sister." Martha smiled weakly. "Thank you. And Hannah, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Give him a chance. Give yourself a chance to be his daughter. You've both lost so much already." That evening, as Martha slipped in and out of consciousness, Hannah found herself sitting beside Richard in the uncomfortable hospital chairs. They didn't talk much, but there was something oddly comforting about sharing the vigil. "I called Daniel," Hannah said quietly. "I didn't tell him about everything, but I told him I was at the hospital with family. He's coming tomorrow. Are you going to tell him the truth?" "I don't know. I love him, but this is so much to process. I don't want to drag him into this mess." Richard was quiet for a moment. "When your mother was pregnant with you, she was terrified. She kept saying she didn't know how to be a mother, that she wasn't ready, that she'd mess everything up. What did you tell her? That love was enough, that we'd figure out the rest together?" He looked at Hannah with eyes that held 23 years of longing. "I think the same thing applies now, to being parents, to being family. We don't have to have all the answers right away." Martha died peacefully at 3:42 a.m., with Hannah holding one hand and Richard holding the other. Her last words were, "Take care of each other," as the hospital staff handled the necessary procedures. Hannah found herself alone with Richard in the hallway. The woman who had connected them was gone, and now they had to figure out how to be father and daughter without her. "What happens now?" Hannah asked. "I don't know," Richard admitted, "but I'd like to start by helping you plan Martha's funeral. She deserves to be honored for loving you, even if she made mistakes along the way." Hannah nodded, then surprised herself by reaching out and taking his hand. "I'm scared. So am I. But you're right about one thing. Love has to be enough to start with. Everything else, we'll figure out together, for the first time in 23 years. Richard Whitmore felt hope blooming in his chest. His daughter was home, and they were finally ready to begin building the relationship that had been stolen from them so long ago. 8 months later, on a sweltering August afternoon, Hannah gripped Daniel's hand as another contraction swept through her body. The labor and delivery room at Chicago General was filled with nervous energy, but also with something that had been missing from her life for far too long: family. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Daniel whispered, smoothing her hair back from her sweat-dampened forehead. "Just breathe through it." Richard paced near the window, his phone buzzing with messages from his assistant, but his attention was completely focused on his daughter. Over the past months, they'd slowly built a relationship that was both fragile and fierce. It hadn't been easy. There were awkward moments, misunderstandings, and times when the weight of their lost years felt insurmountable. But they'd persevered, guided by Martha's dying wish and their own desperate need to heal. "Mr. Whitmore, you're making me dizzy," Dr. Sarah Chen said with a smile as she checked Hannah's progress. "Maybe sit down for a minute." "I can't," Richard admitted, running his hands through his hair. "I missed everything the first time. Every milestone, every moment. I need to be present for this." Hannah looked at him through the haze of pain and exhaustion. "Dad, you're going to wear a hole in the floor." The word still felt strange on her tongue sometimes. "Dad." But it was getting easier, especially in moments like this when his love and concern were so evident. "Sorry," Richard said, settling into the chair beside her bed. I've never been a grandfather before." "You're going to be great at it," Hannah assured him, then gasped as another contraction hit. "Oh God, Daniel, I think..." "Okay, Hannah. It's time," Dr. Chen said, moving into position. "Your baby is ready to make an appearance." The next hour was a blur of pain, pushing, and overwhelming emotion. Daniel never left her side, whispering words of encouragement and love. Richard held her other hand, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed the miracle of new life. And then, suddenly, there was a cry, strong and healthy and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Chen announced, lifting the tiny, squirming baby for everyone to see. Hannah sobbed with relief and joy as they placed her daughter on her chest. The baby was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a pair of bright green eyes that looked exactly like Hannah's own. "She's beautiful," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect." Richard stood frozen, staring at his granddaughter with wonder. "She looks just like you did when you were born," he said to Hannah. "Same eyes, same little nose." "Emily Grace," Hannah said softly, looking down at her daughter. "That's her name. Emily Grace Whitmore Avery." They'd chosen the name carefully. Emily for the strength and grace they hoped she'd carry through life, and Grace for the second chance they'd all been given. As the medical staff cleaned up and performed the necessary checks, Hannah found herself overwhelmed by the completeness of the moment. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by family. Her father, her partner, and now her daughter. The family she'd lost as a child had been rebuilt, different but whole. "Can I hold her?" Richard asked tentatively. Hannah nodded, watching as her father carefully took Emily Grace in his arms. The sight of this powerful man, who commanded boardrooms and built empires, cradling a tiny baby with such reverence and love, made her heart swell. "Hello, little one," Richard whispered to the baby. "I'm your grandfather. I promise I'm going to do better with you than I did with your mama." As he spoke, something extraordinary happened. The memories that had been locked away for so long began flooding back, not in painful flashes, but in warm, golden waves. Hannah remembered being held just like this, remembered the sound of Richard's voice as he sang her to sleep, remembered feeling completely safe and loved in his arms. "I remember," she said suddenly, her voice filled with wonder. "I remember you singing to me. I remember Sunday mornings in the garden, and how you used to make pancakes shaped like animals." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "You remember? It's all coming back," Hannah said, laughing through her tears. "The stories you used to tell me about brave princesses, the way you'd check for monsters under my bed, the time you taught me to ride my bike in the driveway." The weight of 23 years of separation seemed to lift from both of them. The memories weren't gone. They'd just been waiting for the right moment to return. Over the next few days, as Hannah recovered and adjusted to motherhood, the small hospital room became a hub of activity. Daniel's parents came to meet their new granddaughter, immediately welcoming Hannah into their family with open arms. Detective Collins stopped by with flowers and a card signed by everyone at the police station who'd followed the case over the years. But the most meaningful visit came from Dr. Elizabeth Brooks, the therapist who'd been helping Hannah process her recovered identity and complex family history. "How are you feeling about everything?" Dr. Brooks asked as Hannah nursed Emily Grace. "Overwhelmed," Hannah admitted, "but good overwhelmed. For the first time in my life, I feel like I know who I am, not just as Hannah Clarke, and not just as Ellie Whitmore, but as both. All of it is part of me. And your father." Hannah looked across the room where Richard was showing Daniel baby photos on his phone, pictures of her as an infant that Martha had never seen. "He's trying so hard, sometimes I can see him holding back, afraid of overstepping or pushing too hard. But I want him to know that he doesn't have to be careful with me anymore. We're family." That evening, as visiting hours ended and the hospital grew quiet, Hannah found herself alone with Emily Grace and Richard. Daniel had gone home to shower and get some rest, and the nurses had dimmed the lights. "I have something for you," Richard said, pulling out a small wrapped box. "I was going to wait until you came home, but it feels right to give it to you now." Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with 3 charms, a heart engraved with Hannah, another with Ellie, and a third with Emily Grace. "Past, present, and future," Richard explained. "All the parts of who you are, all the love that connects us." Hannah slipped the bracelet on, feeling the weight of the charms against her wrist. "It's perfect. I have something else too," Richard said, his voice becoming more serious. "I've been working on something for months. Ever since Martha died, I want to create a foundation in her name and your mother's name, the Rachel and Martha Foundation. It would help families who've been separated by tragedy, provide resources for finding missing children, and support therapy for trauma survivors. Hannah's eyes widened. That's incredible. I want you to help me run it. When you're ready, when Emily Grace is older, I think Martha would have liked knowing that something good came from all the pain. As if she understood the significance of the moment, Emily Grace chose that moment to open her eyes and look directly at her grandfather. Richard gasped, seeing himself reflected in those familiar green eyes. She's going to know her whole family, Hannah said softly. She's going to know about her grandmother Rachel and her great-aunt Martha. She's going to know about the pharmacy where we found each other, and about the angels who don't rush but wait for the right moment to bring families together. Richard reached over and took Hannah's hand. She's going to know that love can survive anything. Time, distance, even death. And she's going to know that her family fought their way back to each other. As the Chicago skyline glittered outside the hospital window, 3 generations of Whitmores sat together in peaceful silence. The journey had been long and painful, marked by loss and mistakes, and 23 years of separation. But it had led them here, to this moment of perfect completeness. Emily Grace slept peacefully in her mother's arms, surrounded by the love that had been waiting for her before she was even born, and for the first time since that terrible night in December 2001. The Whitmore family was truly whole. 2 years had transformed everything. The Rachel and Martha Foundation headquarters buzzed with quiet efficiency on the morning of its official dedication ceremony. Hannah, who now went by Ellie professionally but still answered to both names, stood in her office reviewing the guest list one final time. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Lake Michigan stretching endlessly toward the horizon, its surface gleaming in the October sunlight. "Mama, up!" Emily Grace toddled over to her mother, her chubby arms raised expectantly. At 2 years old, she was a perfect blend of both parents, Daniel's steady temperament and Hannah's expressive green eyes, with Richard's stubborn determination already showing through. "Hello, my little angel," Hannah said, scooping up her daughter. "Are you ready for Grandpa's big day?" Emily Grace clapped her hands enthusiastically. "Grandpa." The relationship between Richard and Emily Grace had been immediate and absolute. From the moment he'd first held her in the hospital, they'd been inseparable. Richard, who had missed every milestone of Hannah's childhood, was determined not to miss a single moment of his granddaughter's life. He read her bedtime stories via video call when he traveled, taught her to identify birds in the Foundation's garden, and spoiled her with an enthusiasm that both amused and touched Hannah. "There are my favorite girls." Daniel's voice came from the doorway. He looked handsome in his navy suit, a far cry from the nervous young man who'd once been intimidated by dating a billionaire's daughter. The past 2 years had given him confidence, and Hannah's love had given him certainty about his place in this extraordinary family. "How are the preparations going downstairs?" Hannah asked, settling Emily Grace on her hip. "Everything's perfect. Your father is pacing like a caged tiger, but Detective Collins is keeping him distracted with stories about their latest missing persons case." Daniel straightened Hannah's necklace, the gold locket from her childhood that she wore every day now. "Are you nervous about your speech?" "Terrified," Hannah admitted. "But it's good terrified. Martha used to say that the things worth doing are usually the things that scare us most." The foundation had been Richard's idea, but it had become Hannah's passion. Over the past year, they'd reunited 14 families, provided therapy for 37 trauma survivors, and created a network of support that stretched across the Midwest. Every success felt like a victory, not just for the families they helped, but for their own journey from loss to healing. Mrs. Whitmore Avery, Richard's assistant Jennifer, appeared in the doorway. "The mayor's office just called. Mayor Rodriguez will be here in 20 minutes for the ribbon cutting." "Thank you, Jennifer." Hannah took a deep breath. "I guess it's time." The foundation's main hall had been transformed for the dedication ceremony. Nearly 200 people filled the space. City officials, social workers, police officers, and most importantly, families they'd helped reunite. At the front of the room, 3 portraits dominated the wall. Rachel Whitmore, smiling and radiant. Martha Bennett, captured in a rare moment of pure joy with young Hannah. And between them, a photo of 6-year-old Ellie, the child whose disappearance had started it all. Richard took the podium first, his voice steady despite the emotion Hannah could see in his eyes. 23 years ago, I lost my family. I thought they were gone forever. My wife to a tragic accident, my daughter to circumstances I couldn't understand. What I learned through years of searching is that love doesn't disappear just because people do. Love waits. Love endures. Love finds a way. He gestured toward Hannah, who sat in the front row with Daniel and Emily Grace. My daughter taught me that we don't just inherit our families, we choose them every day. We choose to forgive, to rebuild, to trust again even when trust has been broken. The applause was warm and heartfelt, but Hannah barely heard it. She was thinking about Martha, about the woman who'd made an impossible decision out of love and fear, about Rachel, who died trying to come home, about all the families still searching for each other, still hoping for their own miracle. When Richard called her to the podium, Hannah's legs felt unsteady, but as she looked out at the crowd, she saw faces that had become familiar over the past months. Social workers who'd become partners, police officers who'd become friends, families who'd become success stories. For most of my life, I felt incomplete, she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. I knew something was missing, but I couldn't name it. I had nightmares about places I'd never been, heard melodies I couldn't identify, felt homesick for a home I'd never seen. Emily Grace gurgled happily from Daniel's lap, and Hannah smiled. It took becoming a mother myself to understand what I'd lost, but it also took becoming a mother to understand what I'd gained. Martha Bennett, the woman who raised me, made a choice that separated me from my biological family, but she also gave me something precious. She taught me that love isn't limited by biology or circumstances. Family is what you make it. She paused, looking directly at Richard. My father and I lost 23 years together. We can't get those years back, but we can make sure that other families don't lose what we lost. We can be the bridge that brings people home. The ceremony continued with testimonials from families the foundation had helped. Maria Santos, whose teenage son had been found living on the streets of Milwaukee after running away from an abusive foster home. James and Carol Phillips, who'd been reunited with their daughter after a kidnapping that had torn their family apart for 8 years. Each story was a testament to the power of hope and persistent love. But it was the final speaker who brought tears to every eye in the room. Mrs. Rose, now 81, and walking with a cane, made her way slowly to the podium. I met Hannah, Ellie, at a pharmacy 2 years ago, she said, her voice strong despite her age. I was a desperate old woman who couldn't afford her granddaughter's insulin, and this young lady paid for it with her own money. She got fired for helping me, but she didn't hesitate. She said something that day that I'll never forget. The angels don't rush. They wait for the right time to help the right people. Mrs. Rose looked directly at Hannah. I didn't know then that she was one of those angels, that her kindness would lead to finding her own family, and that her family would create this place where other angels come to help other people find their way home. The ribbon cutting was ceremonial, but meaningful. Richard, Hannah, and Emily Grace cut the ribbon together while cameras flashed and the crowd applauded. Emily Grace, delighted by the attention, clapped her hands and shouted, "Grandpa!" at the top of her lungs, earning laughter from everyone present as the reception began and guests mingled throughout the foundation's offices. Hannah found herself standing in the memorial garden they'd created in the building's courtyard. Rachel and Martha's names were engraved on a bench surrounded by flowers that bloomed in cycles, ensuring something was always growing, always beautiful. Richard joined her, Emily Grace now sleeping peacefully in his arms. She would have been proud, he said softly, looking at Martha's name on the bench. They both would have been, Hannah agreed. Even though Martha made mistakes, she loved me completely. And Mom would have loved seeing us find each other again. She would have loved meeting this little one too, Richard said, adjusting Emily Grace's blanket. Do you think she knows? Somehow, Hannah considered the question seriously. Over the past 2 years, she'd felt Rachel's presence in quiet moments. When Emily Grace laughed in her sleep, when Richard sang lullabies with the same gentle voice she remembered from childhood, when their small family gathered for Sunday dinners and the house felt full of love again. I think she knows, Hannah said finally. I think they both know. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a rainy December day in a small pharmacy to To this moment of triumph and healing, every step had been necessary. The pain, the loss, the years of separation. It all led to this foundation, to the families they would help, to the love that had finally found its way home. Emily Grace stirred in Richard's arms and opened her eyes, looking around the garden with the serious expression of a child taking in the world. She pointed toward the sky and said her newest word clearly, "Angel." Hannah and Richard looked up to see two white birds circling overhead, their wings catching the last rays of sunlight before they disappeared into the distance. "Yes, sweetheart," Hannah whispered, taking her daughter's tiny hand. Angels. The angels, it seemed, were still watching over them. And this time, they had all the time in the world.